Bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Esto es Conexionistas y vamos a hablar de un tema que realmente se nos había pasado. Nosotros no lo teníamos en la vida y bueno, pues ya nos dimos cuenta que tiene una dimensión muy grande en todo lo que ocurre pues a nivel mundial y a nivel nacional. Y como pueden ver, está con nosotros Jason Smart, un experto en temas de política, ciencias políticas y también en todo lo que es en los estados soviéticos, pero un observador desde Sudamérica. Él está en Ecuador, ¿verdad? Y desde ahí analiza todo el tema de lo que ocurre, pues una geopolítica muy interesante alrededor del narcotráfico, ¿no? Edgar, ¿cómo estás?
Amigas, amigos de Conexionistas, gusto en estar con ustedes de nuevo. Y la vez pasada que platicamos con Jason, daba una dimensión en el momento de describir cómo estaba o cómo ocurría la dinámica política de los estados, digamos, soviéticos, dentro de lo que fue la Unión Soviética y ahora, pues si ya hablaba del poder del oligarca, de esta figura de un individuo que sobre todo combina este trabajo de la ilegalidad, muchas cantidades de dinero, acciones ilícitas, y pensamos en los cárteles en México, en esta dinámica política que existe ahora en el país, en donde los cárteles han tomado una mayor presencia política, una mayor actividad y quizás eh, una legitimación dentro de la opinión pública que incomoda mucho. Y Jason nos habló aquella vez de algunos temas. So Jason, welcome again. Thank you for enlightening us about what is going on between this relation among, you know, illegal groups regarding, illegal activities, power, money, weapons. So please let us explain us what you are seeing between these drug cartels in Mexico and their relationship with other international groups.
So it's a very interesting situation, and I appreciate you inviting me. I regularly live in Ukraine, but I'm visiting Latin America at the moment, and I have followed for a number of years the relationship between these drug groups and state actors. So there's two groups: there's state actors and non-state actors. Non-state actors are organizations such as Hamas, such as Hezbollah, or such as the drug cartels. These groups are not a formalized government, whereas governments such as Venezuela, Mexico, actual states, right? So what's important here is this: there's a common interest that some non-state actors and some governments have in common. And what would that be? It would be those governments that are not able to have access to liquidity or to the financial markets, specifically states that are under sanctions. And I cite an example is the country of Iran, the country of Venezuela, or the country of North Korea, or countries that do not have access to the world banking system. And so they have a problem. They can't easily transactions. They can't easily get dollars or euros. And so they're forced to do other things. And what they have to do specifically is get hard currency. Now, lots of hard currency that is tangible bills that they're willing to part with. Well, actually, the drug cartels. The drug cartels have lots of cash, lots and lots of cash, and they have the inverse problem. Their problem is they have so much cash, they don't know what to do with it, and they don't have access to a banking system. But state actors do have access to banking systems. There is a national bank in Russia, there's private banks in Russia, as there is in Venezuela, Iran, and other places. So they can actually give you money in a bank account. Now, there's obviously going to be difficulties because those are sanctioned countries, but it is an actual bank. It's legitimately there. It's collecting interest, and it can be used for transactions around the world, or it can be buy crypto, for instance. There's a lot of things that can be done with this money. So why would these countries, what do they get in return? Well, they get a lot of things in return. One is that drugs is something that's universally got a buyer. I mean, if I take drugs today to Asia or to Africa, to Latin America, to the United States, there's going to be a buyer. I can certainly sell that somewhere. And that's why it is very nice to be able to transport drugs like guns. Weapons is something that has historically been something that Russia, using proxies, has traded in. How does it do that? Well, Russia officially will never go out and do a lot of things, like illegally trade in drugs or guns. But they use proxies, such as the movie Lord of War with Nicolas Cage is about this, by the way. When you have these mafias that are going out engaging in selling guns to specific dictators or specific criminal groups in Africa, that's not being done by chance. That person didn't just decide to leave Moscow one day and go to that specific country and organize this. No, he's acting as a proxy for the government to do so. Same as the Wagner Group, which is run by Yevgeny Prigozhin, was providing security to state actors such as Venezuela or to gold mines in Africa. Where did that idea come from? It wasn't his idea. The government said, we, the Russian government, cannot formally do this, but you, as a businessman, can go do this, and so we encourage you to go do this. And so he goes down and does this. So the Russian state does actively participate in international crime through things like their proxies and directly as well using their banking system.
So we have a kind of a clue here. So we need like kind of a middleman, let me put it that way, to fulfill my needs of security, to fulfill my needs of money laundering, to fulfill my needs of technology as well, and weapons. Is that correct to view it that way?
Sure. I mean, there's a supply and demand. It's like any other market system. So, people need weapons, people need cash, or they need banks. They need abilities to wash their money. And, let's be honest, washing money is not as easy as it used to be. It's becoming ever more complicated. But if you have a government that's actually providing that service to you, that's sending bankers and economists to figure out how to wash more money with you, guys with PhDs, guys that are lawyers that will really work on this, it really makes things a lot easier, especially when they're going to take it to a third country such as Venezuela, where they'll be able to work in close cooperation with the government to make this a reality.
So basically, as I was telling you last conversation we had, I lost my innocence here because we used to think that cartels are a very local player with a very high amounts of power in their hands. So it's no longer that way. I mean, I understand that about what you're saying. So one of the conclusions we can have here is that, look, these are international players as well. They don't they act locally, of course, but they have such an amount of money, such an amount of cash in their hands that they need to somehow fulfill their own needs to operate the way they operate. So in this international dimension, and we're particularly, worried about what's going on in Mexico because we think that, with the policy of this government in Mexico, it's sometimes, he just, we know that if he still has a leash in their hands to hold some kind of power between the state and the criminal organizations. So in this dimension that you are clarifying right now, so those cartels in Mexico are not alone. So somehow they are connected to another criminal, organizations worldwide. Is that correct?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I give an example is that Islamic groups are known to cooperate throughout Latin America. Islamic radical groups, terrorist organizations, Hamas, for instance, Hezbollah, for instance. And what they're doing there is that they once again face the same problem. Back home, it's much harder for them to be involved. Everybody knows who they are. They know why to avoid them. They know why they're dangerous. But if you look at what's going on in Latin America, these groups have a very strong root. One, they are experts in bomb making. They are very good experts in weapons transport. They also buy a lot of weapons, but they know how to transport them, which is very useful. And countries like Iran, which does finance terrorist groups globally, has the benefit of being able to, let's say, do a construction project in Mexico. Those construction projects could actually be means of money laundering for them as well, or to help the Mexican cartels to get their money back into the country by the Iranian state or its subcontractors, that is its proxies, doing construction of buildings, which then can be bought and sold, which then allows the money to re-enter the Mexican market for the Mexican narcos. And so this is something that is widespread. Now, if you look at how it's expanded over time, I think that there's a significant factor is that things have changed in the past few years. In the case of Ecuador, which I was visiting, there is the groups of Albanians who have showed up here. Albanians now are the largest criminal group. How did the Albanians show up in Ecuador, of all the places in the world? Little Albania produced some of the toughest guys now in Ecuador. They are running the gangs. And why is that? Is because though the local cartels exist and there's local power, the international ones have much more power and influence because they're not operating alone. The Russian mafia, for instance, is not just a mafia of people like the cartels are. They are working in direct cooperation with the intelligence service of Russia. That is, the intelligence service of Russia is willing to help them track their opponents, to give them information about their opponents, to listen to phone calls of their opponents, and able to do what an intelligence service does, but for a rogue actor, which is the narcos. Or their mafias. And so the mafias that work with them are going to be able to more profit than those that do not work with them because they simply have access to materials, resources, intelligence that others do not have.
That's huge. That's another dimension of reality. And regarding specifically in Mexico, I'm interested in these similarities between those groups and the groups that we have in Mexico. So basically we see that this is the similarities are, not as important as the market, satisfying the needs, or are there any other cultural dimension that you can see that that's where the fit begins in the collaboration is between these two organizations, or this just simply markets and supply?
It's purely business. And so I think that's always been sort of a myth about these different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I give the example of Russia, is that it's been identified a lot of people as being, that depends, it's people on both the left and the right have their own myth about Russia. The people on the left identify with the Soviet period as
Right.
being socialist or left-leaning, and the workers against imperialism is always something to talk about in Latin America and Africa. And people on the right always praise Russia for being white and Christian and very conservative. And the fact is that Russia is a society not extremely religious. It's only about less than 1% of the population attends church regularly. It's, as a country, ethnically diverse. It's not all white like the people on the right think, but it's for the people on the left to disappoint them as well. The country is in no means socialistic. I mean, in theory, I guess there are various things like medicine that can be free, but due to the fact that the system is so broken, there is no more free medicine in the country. The average person does live in very poor states. The average income in Russia is extremely low. And the reason for it is that Putin and the Kremlin has allowed that the upper circle, that is the oligarchs, control all the opportunities, all the resources of the state. And they are the ones that work with the intelligence services, and they work with international terrorist groups. But look at who Russia's allies are. There's nothing in common between ideologically, if we look at Russia as a leftist country, then why is it working with Iran, a country that's extremely far right? It is a fascist, totalitarian theocracy that executes gays, it executes, people who live together, it executes lots of people. Anyone who's against the state or rebels against the state gets executed. So there's nothing leftist about this whatsoever. But then you try to compare it. Well, how does it happen with North Korea? North Korea is in no means communist. I mean, it's a myth. It started that way, but it took out of its constitution even a couple of years ago. It's no longer even Stalinistic. It's just considered to be the cult of the dictator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Sí.
So, yeah.
Go ahead.
So that's why they get along with the narcos. I mean, the fact is they all have something in common. They all have a demand for either money or moving money, one way or another, weapons and drugs. So they have something in common. It's just a business interest. It's nothing more than just an interest to make money and to survive being sanctioned by the international community.
We all see from our governments, the U.S. government and the Mexican government, campaigns about the drugs, saying we are fighting the drug trade, we are fighting the drug cartels, we are fighting everything about drugs. But you come here and talk us about the reality of this. The big government corporations like DEA or any other one in the world are aware of this. Are they taking some steps to control this, to fight against this?
Oh, of course. I mean, the international organizations like DEA are very aware of this. And that's why the fact is, I understand why countries don't like the DEA. I do understand that. That being said, I would support the DEA if I lived in Latin America, simply because they have resources that countries do not have. And I give you the examples. I've mentioned the Albanian mafia. I've mentioned the Islamic groups. I've mentioned the Iranian groups. I've mentioned all these different organizations from foreign countries, the Russians. They speak different languages. And unless your country has an indigenous population speaking Albanian and Serbian and Russian and Farsi and Arabic in such high numbers that you're able to actively monitor what they're doing and trace it, then you're really lost, especially because the money's being moved to Europe and then moved to Asia and other countries. Unless you have a wide enough intelligence network to be seeing where the money goes and what the relationships are, you're really sort of ineffective. You can't do anything. And you can look locally. Once again, you talk about the cartels being local. Yes. I mean, you can look at that level. This guy in this street corner sold drugs to that guy in that street corner, or maybe even higher within the country. Who are the big players? You can monitor them in Spanish. But once it gets further than that, more complicated than that, it becomes very troublesome. And so I think that it's something that there is a benefit to having the ability to network with the other countries also involved in this via the DA, because they're able to share intelligence and also share knowledge about what these organizations are engaged in and what they're planning next.
Claro. The other thing is about corruptions. The Latin American institutions are very corrupt. Mexican institutions are very corrupt about the drug with the drug cartels. They work with them. The DIA, it's free of it. It's a kind of the one who can presume they are clean and they are doing the things right, or they are with the drug cartel. So also,
I've never seen evidence that they've been tied to the drug cartels. I mean, I'm sure in the past, listen, people are people. I'm sure there's been incidences, but as a whole, no, they're not. Because keep in mind, the U.S. has 16 or 17 intelligence agencies. Out of the 16 or 17 intelligence agencies, you take, the navies, and that's everyone thinks the CIA, but they're not the biggest. You look at the NSA, which just listens to phone calls and read internet traffic. You look at the CIA, which yes is human intelligence. You look at the military intelligence, the various groups of it. You look at the DEA and its intelligence organization. You look at the State Department intelligence organization. They all have groups, and they're all working globally, and they're all cooperating together. And they're spending tens of billions of dollars a year working on things like this.
Okay.
And that's why, in the US, there was a big campaign after September 11th terrorist attack that, when you buy drugs, you're supporting Islamic terrorism. And people thought it was absurd because they didn't in the link. And at the time, I was younger, it wasn't so clear for me either, but it's because it's true. The way that these groups are financed is through things such as the international drug trade. This money isn't just appearing out of nowhere. Where do you think people get the money for this? It's from things like cartels.
So we can trust the DIA better than our institutions.
I think it's not just the DNA. I think it's just the whole system. I think it's more about having a bunch of intelligence agencies and with independent, I think profile independent. They have their own schemes, they have their own budgets. So I think that gives you the ability to cross any other agency that it seems like it's becoming corrupt. I think it could be that way. But by hearing you, I'm thinking about. There is a different profile about the criminals organized in Mexico. So at least to my knowledge, because we romanticize about this rancher coming from a very poor families from the country that all of a sudden became very ambitious, very well organized, visionary somehow, and then start their activities. Then somehow his life is linked with former military members, and all of a sudden they end up trafficking drugs and becoming very powerful. But that image is no longer in place after hearing you. So we have very complex guys now. We have very criminals that are mostly businessmen. They are taking care about their business. They are taking care about the continuity of their business, and they will are willing to do anything to increase their power, increase their business as any businessman. So I really want to explore with you the role of intelligence, because that is a very, very small amount of part that it's known where in the public opinion we think about in this profile. We think about gunpowder and manpower, and you've seen all this news, But what about intelligence? I think it's more important than that. By hearing you, I think intelligence now, it's a kind of one of the legs of their power, the source of the power, and I think intelligence plays a role because they can challenge the state, at least in Mexico. So by achieving those levels of intelligence, is that the piece specifically that this international crime community puts in place? Do you think that's key, the role? Because without that, I don't see any local criminal, achieving those levels of expertise.
Absolutely. I think that the intelligence value is probably the highest value. Simply, it's also the know-how. Let's be honest. The United States, when they recruit for its government, for the CIA or DEA, they're recruiting at the best universities. They don't go to the worst universities. So it's very possible you see them recruiting at the Harvards and the Georgetowns and the Yales. So when you've got a workforce filled with people that are Georgetown, PhDs, talking about Latin America, I think that their understanding is quite strong versus my limited experience with Latin America's. I don't work with the police or intelligence, but I've met people that do, and I've realized their level of preparation is just very, very low. They're just, they were local police that got shifted over to go do something else, and now they're in charge of this. And what is their actual ability to what's going on to track money laundering? Money laundering is simple when it's between two people, but what if multiple times you're buying and selling different properties, then converting it to a local currency, then to another currency, then changing it to ship it to a third country, then goes to Iran. Iran then buys weapons and transacts it for to a terrorist organization, which then completes something else, and that money then comes back to your country. does Mexico really have the ability to do that? And how would it do that? What experience does it have in doing that? And I don't think it does. And let's be frank, is I think that the U.S., just due to its size, yes, it does have the ability to put pressure on countries that, would be hard for maybe a Panama. And I give you the example is, if the U.S. needs information from even a country like China, the Chinese will be willing to cooperate because they take it seriously. Panama probably don't take it seriously. And so there's ability to work together is not going to be true for all countries around the world. And also, I think that the U.S. is trusted as far as the intelligence security stuff. It is trusted. Even with China, there's reason to cooperate. There is, there's obviously not a lot of love for each other. It's an understanding that the Americans are serious. They don't think that they're not, serious professionals. I don't know if they would have the same opinion of the Bolivian intelligence service, for instance.
So now the intelligence plays a role here in not just in the criminal scenario, in the criminal warfare. I think it also plays a role in the elections, plays a role where the criminals are present with a different face. They're not just criminals anymore. They're political players as well. So in my last question will be, this is an evolving path. I can see an evolution of this role according to, of course, very tight to the amount of money they can spend, they have in their hands. So in the future, do you see this complexity going further? Do you see any kind of control? Because going back to Mexico in the 70s and the relationship with these drug cartels in the US and the market and all that we already know, we have that in the past. We have that like 40 years ago, not anymore. So I see the example we have right now is like complexity. It's kind of favoring the criminal organizations. The criminal organizations are getting more complex. I'm not trying to imply that state organizations are not. But I'm saying here is that it seems like state organizations haven't had enough, having power, will, cash, I don't know, to stop this evolution from criminal organizations. Do you see that basically is that a path that we have to get used to, or is there any possibility of disruption in that path and contain and stop criminal organizations to increase their power and their complexity?
I think that's a good question, and I do think it changed over time. I'm not an expert on the history of the drug cartels, but I do think that earlier was more localized. There was more direct. Some guy got rich, he had a great idea, and he starts, drugs. And next thing you know, he's importing it to the U.S. And these people became very wealthy. But there's a lot less of those stories today, and I think there's a reason for that. Is because it's more controlled, one, but two, you're now dealing with state actors. They're not dealing directly, they're not receiving orders from the Kremlin or from Tehran, okay? But they are receiving assistance, which then sort of makes them forced to cooperate with these governments because they have all their money. So who work with them?
Okay, simple as that. Well, that's another reality that we haven't seen and we didn't have in our radar, to be honest. So, and I think there's a lot of, at least common knowledge that they used to think in these cartel guys as the rancher that became very, very entrepreneurial, let me put it that way. And it's not anymore. This is an international phenomenon. And thank you, Jason, for clarifying to put this value on the table. And thank you for your time again. And I hope we can talk with you again with these very interesting topics and not off the radar. I really like that. We didn't see that quite often. So thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you. Great day.
Thank you very much, Jason. Could you give us your Twitter handle, please?
It's at OfficeJJ Smart. At OfficeJJ Smart.
Thank you very much. Bueno, también nosotros somos Conexionistas MX en Twitter y en Facebook. En YouTube somos Conexionistas México y en Spotify somos Conexionistas hacia secas. Sí, la música que estábamos escuchando es música de Alejandro Sabo, ahorita lo encuentran en YouTube, y el diseño es de Sofía Reynoso, ella lo encuentran en Facebook y en Twitter. Muchas gracias, nosotros somos Conexionistas.